Hi, I'm Mackenzie. I am co-founder and admin at Science of Reading Australia. I am a teacher. I started my career as a language teacher, a LOTE teacher, and English as an additional language. And I've taught French, German, and Spanish while working as a LOTE teacher. A few years ago, I had a bit of a pivot to become a literacy teacher, and I have enjoyed this role immensely, and it has been a huge learning journey for me. I discovered the science of reading, and since then I have been on a quest to find out as much as I can about what works best when we're teaching reading. And that is the reason that I gathered some like-minded colleagues together, and we started the Science of Reading Australia. We are going to be doing a podcast and a video series with some of the key players in that space. And I'm joined today by my colleague and co-creator and admin at Science of Reading Australia, and my partner on this quest, Camilla Gaff.
Thank you, Ali. And I'm so happy to be on this quest with you. I've loved every minute of it so far. I'm a primary teacher in Victoria with over 20 years experience. The last 10 years, I have been working in year one, and it's become a real passion for me, that touch point in a learning journey. And over the last 2 to 3 years, I was looking for more information about best practice for teaching children reading. And through another one of our admin, Jane Burke-Colleen, I learned an enormous amount about the science of reading, and I've just loved every minute of it. And the reason I've loved it is because it makes complete sense. And then it's so easily transferred into your classroom practices that you see results quickly. And that just made me more and more excited at this time in my professional journey to feel like I've got a really solid toolkit for teaching my children how to read well. Last year I completed the Sounds Right training, and I absolutely loved the tools that it gave me that I could use in my classroom. So I'm really looking forward to unpacking the history and the purpose and the theory behind the Sounds Right program with our interviewees today. Thank you for taking me on this journey with you, Ali.
Thank you for coming with me, Camilla. It's such a privilege. Our first video chat with the Sounds Right team, we're going to be joined by John Walker from the UK, the co-creator of Sounds Right. And then we've got Helen Hampton, who is one of the Sounds Right trainers based in WA. And we've got Jacinda Vaughn joining us as well. So she's a Sounds Right trainer based on the East Coast here in Australia. All right, so let's go.
Look forward to it.
All right, good evening. And it is my absolute pleasure and privilege to have the Sounds Right team with us this evening. So Camilla and I are very lucky to have John Walker, the creator of the Sounds Right program, with us, as well as Helen, one of the Sounds Right trainers from Western Australia. I'm right there.
That's right, yep.
And we've got Jacinda as well, who is one of our Sounds Right trainers over in New South Wales. So big welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us to come on and talk about Sounds Right a bit. Lovely, thank you.
Lovely to have you. John, I'm going to come to you first. We'd love to hear a little bit about you. You are zooming in from the UK today, or this evening, I think. And we'd love to hear how you came to be in the position you're in, your history with language and literacy, and of course, how Sounds Right came about.
Sure. Now, I'll try and keep this pretty short. I was a teacher, in fact, in secondary schools for nearly 20 years, and I taught in primary schools as well for 3 or 4 years as well, too. I've worked for the British Council, teaching English as a foreign language and helping to train teachers in the teaching of English as a foreign language. So in a way, that was a great start into, looking at phonics programs, because of course, as you know, you have to be well aware of how many sounds there are in the English language and how many ways there are of spelling those sounds too, if you're teaching particularly beginners how to read and write English when they speak a foreign language. So that's sort of a bit of the background. I came to develop the program after really reading this book, Why Children Can't Read. This was a book that made, I think, more impression on me than anything I'd ever read before. And I was interested in phonics and read an awful lot. I read a lot of Jean Chall's work from the 1960s, all about the reading revolution and so on. But this was the book, Why Children Can't Read, was the book that really did it for me. And it's one of the greatest books I think I've ever come across. She's written other books, Professor Diane McGuinness, but that was the one that really seized me by the throat, if you like, and got my attention. So we started Sounds Right in 2002. We started writing it then, and we actually started training people in 2003. And since that time, we've trained huge numbers of people all over the world, particularly in the UK, in Australia, some people in New Zealand. We're starting to train people now in greater numbers in Canada and in the United States. And we might say something at some point anyway about the research that we did in the early days and the research we've got on whole class teaching. So
yeah,
really,
I think we do. It is our intention to come and ask you a little bit about that research. That would be great. All right, thank you, John. I can relate. I come from an EAL background as well, so that's how I came into literacy. Yeah, it's a really good foundation.
Definitely.
All right, Helen. Hi.
Hi. I've got a varied background. I originally had a business management background, and that involved an awful lot of training and development of staff. And so that's where my learning about teaching and training came from. And then when my children came along, I lectured at TAFE, and I also did some early Chastana-based early childhood work as well. And then in round about, it would have been about 2005, 2006, my daughter really began struggling at school, and I got increasingly worried. And I took her to be diagnosed or to be assessed by a educational psychologist based at the University of West Australia, and she was diagnosed with double deficit dyslexia, and the psychologist was adamant that the only way you are going to get through to your daughter to acquire literacy skills is with a linguistic approach to phonics. And luckily for us, there was a local speech pathologist, I live in rural West Australia, who understood that linguistic approach. And so I worked with the two of them. We had a full team to get my daughter up and running, and lo and behold, it worked. Within about the first 10 weeks, the penny started to drop and she started to move, which I was delighted. And moving on, that was back in 2007 when we first started that. And then because I live in a small town, my phone started to ring saying, look, we know you've got your daughter over the line. How did you do it? And in 2011, I did my training to become a specialist literacy tutor. And at that time, I had to move to a graphemic approach to tutor my students. And I found it very cumbersome and a huge change from the refined linguistic approach that I had used with my daughter. And I just really found it very frustrating. And then in 2013, John brought Sounds Right to West Australia, and I'd started to find out a little bit about it with the Talisman readers, and I jumped at the chance, and I was so delighted when it's a linguistic approach to phonics on day one, and they had the scope and the sequence, and I just loved it. Flipped all my students over to it, became very successful. My phone started to get busier and busier, and I started to talk to a lot of teachers. A lot of teachers became interested in, what are you doing with these kids? They've been sat in the back of a classroom, haven't done anything, and now they're starting to move. And so teachers started to go to Perth for training. And then I began to realise, it's a huge distance from rural West Australia to our main centre, that, to support local schools and local teachers, speech pathologists, psychologists, parents, it made sense to me to become a trainer. And so I became a Sounds Right trainer in 2018. And it's just been absolutely delightful training whole schools to implement the programme, as well as keeping my literacy practice and working with the Sounds Right team, both in Australia and in the UK. So that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Helen.
You're welcome.
All right, Jacinda, could you tell us a little bit about how you came to be here as well?
I'm a little bit like Helen. I was listening to Helen. I'm like, yeah, I'm a little bit like you. It's a convoluted journey. I actually started off as a sports therapist. So physical therapies was where I first trained when I left school. And for a number of reasons, I actually shifted into psychology and studied psychology across a number of universities and headed towards educational psychology. And I've always worked with kids, had a deep passion for those early years. And it was kind of when I finished my psychology degree and I was just about to head out into the next phase of that my husband goes, you love children, you love teaching, why don't you do postgraduate? So I headed off and did postgraduate teaching and primary teaching, but it's the psychology degree that really, I had this deep passion for research and evidence-based practices. So for me, understanding that from that study that I'd done, when I became a teacher right from the beginning, everything that I did, I was looking at it from a cognitive psychology lens or a neuropsychology lens. So that's where I started digging into different programs and analysing them against that, and I found Sounds Right. And then I brought that to my school. 7 years of practice within whole class settings. I was the inclusive education coordinator for the last 6 years, doing that at tier 2, tier 3, and then for the last 2 years I've been in private practice as well, and doing that with those incredibly complex students, those beautiful, dynamic, diverse learners, and just seeing the impact it's had at every single level. I guess the moving into the in-house trainer for Sounds Right is my dream job, and being able to share that with as many people as possible. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Wonderful. Everyone I've met who has that psychology and the education together, they marry so well, and they're just wonderful people to work with. Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, Ali, I'm sure that you agree this an incredible wealth of experiences and knowledge in your stories, and they're just fabulous to learn about. I did want to say that inside our Science of Reading Australia page, and certainly in other educational pages, our groups that I belong to, there are a lot of questions about the Sounds Right program from people that have heard about its successes and have heard about its strengths, but don't understand a lot about what the Sounds Right program looks like. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what the Sounds Right program is and how it works?
Sure. I think the starting point for us is, is something Mark Seidenberg once said, that the starting point for reading is speech. One of the things that we make absolutely clear to people is that reading, of course, depends on having a writing system. You need a writing system in the beginning to be able to read. And writing systems really didn't begin until about 5,000 years ago. So we take people back to give them an understanding of where the writing system came from in the first place, that humans have been speaking for well over 100,000 years. Nobody's quite sure how many 100,000 years, but we certainly know it's been for a hell of a long time. We also know that wherever you go in the world, it's perfectly natural to learn to speak and to listen. What isn't natural is learning a writing system.
Mm.
And the world's experts on writing systems, Peter Daniels and William Bright, say that no child learns their own script without support, without some kind of teaching. Now, okay, there are some children who pick up this with fairly minimal instruction, although nobody's quite sure because nobody monitors children all the time, every day, and sees what kind of influences shape them. But certainly, anyway, we know that for the most part, children need clear, direct instruction. And for clear, direct instruction, obviously, you need a well-structured program. And I think that that's exactly what Sounds Right delivers. It shows people that the spellings, if you like, represent the sounds in the language. We teach from simple to more complex. So we start with what most people start with, actually, and that's simple CVC words. We teach children. We have a clear phonics curriculum, if you like. We teach the declarative knowledge of code knowledge and conceptual understanding. Conceptual understanding for us is front and center as well, I might add. And we teach the 3 skills of segmenting, blending, and phoneme manipulation, all of which are mentioned, of course, in that huge report that was produced in the United States from the reading panel in the year 2000.
Yes.
So we teach, as I say, from simple to complex. We teach something we call an initial code. Perhaps, I know that Jacinda or Helen might want to say a little bit more about that and fill in a little bit of the detail. After that, we go on to teach something called the extended code, where we teach the spellings of all the vowels and all of the alternative consonant spellings, and we teach children simultaneously how to manage, and when I say manage, I mean read and spell polysyllabic words with more than 1 syllable. Again, starting from simple and moving towards the more complex. I think cognitive load theory figures very prominently in what we do. So we like to make sure that we don't present too much information at any one particular moment. We need to keep it very simple. It's thought that probably if you introduce more than 3 new elements to anybody who's learning, whether it's an adult or a young child, then something is going to start falling off the table of working memory. So we make teachers aware of the limitations of working memory in terms of both time and capacity. And the object, of course, is to get information into long-term memory as efficiently as we possibly can, because once it's gone into long-term memory, then it can be brought into working memory to give people something to think with. And if you haven't got anything to think with, you can't think. So yeah, I'm just trying to think what Dylan William once said. I've got a little nice quotation here he says, the purpose, Dylan William is somebody who figures very prominently in the science of reading and in the science of learning, in fact. What he says is that the purpose of the curriculum is to build up the content of long-term memory so that when students are asked to think, they have something to think with.
And now, who was that quote from? Can you just repeat the author?
Professor Dylan William, W-I-L-I-A-M. He's very, very well thought of in the United Kingdom and well across the world, as far as I know, and has done a lot of work on formative assessment and embedded formative assessment, which is also a prominent feature of Sounds Right as well.
Yeah. John, I really appreciated the theory that was part of your program, and I loved the attention that you gave to how we learn best. I really appreciated that, and you certainly talk about cognitive load theory and low variance and the benefits and how that can assist in retrieval practice, and that really changed a lot of my teaching. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's a great pleasure. And thank you for saying such nice things about it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Easy done. Yeah. Helen or Jacinda, did you want to add more to that?
Yeah, I think with you know, in addition to what John said, I think what makes Sounds Right so highly effective is that we teach the how, we teach the why, and we teach the what. And this is something that I do, you know, I keep it very, very simple when I in whether it's face-to-face training or whether we're doing online training. And so we have their activities, we call them lessons, but they're activities to how to teach segmenting, blending, and phoneme manipulation, and how to teach the concepts. And we have 4 concepts that we teach as well. And that's, you know, letters are symbols that represent sounds, that spelling can be represented by 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters, that a sound may be represented by more than one sound. No, sorry, a sound may be represented by more than one way of spelling it. And sorry, the final concept is a spelling or a grapheme may have more than one sound. So for example, the EA spelling, it can be as in bread, it can be A as in steak, or it can be E as in cream. So, you know, it can, so a spelling can be represented by more than one sound. Now, those need a lot of practice, those concepts. And so we, you know, practice, space, you know, retrieval, getting it into long-term memory so students can think and learn from that is a huge part of our program. And then we have the code knowledge. So the squiggles that represent the sounds within words. So, you know, at first, as John's pointed out already, that we teach simple one-to-one sound spelling correspondences. You know, we would recommend first word to teach would be mat or sat, making sure that students are fully aware that what is a mat, or are you sat on a mat? And then we slowly, incrementally build up to introducing double consonants, for example, the double consonant s, z, and did I get them all, Jacinda? I think yeah. And then we sort of really ensure, this is in the first year, that students get a lot of practice at 4 and 5 sound words with what we call adjacent consonants, where you've got either 2 adjacent consonants at the end of a word, then 2 adjacent consonants at the beginning of a word, and then 3 adjacent consonants at the end of a word or at the beginning of a word, so 5 sound words. And then we bring in what would commonly call the digraph. So you sh, ch, sh, yeah. So we bring those in. So it's a very, very clear approach, but it's the how. So we're teaching the how you are going to do this, and the scope, what you are going to teach when. But we also make sure that our practitioners have a full understanding of why you are doing it. You know, how, why, so that you can be very, very discerning. Why are you doing this? And that really makes you think about it. And we really want everyone to think about what they're doing. So that's the real, I think, nuts and bolts really about how the program works. Jacinda, do you want to add anything to that? Or
yeah, as you were talking, the other thing that strikes me about the Sounds Right program is that it's not box ticking. It's about that format, like John referenced it before, with the formative assessment, knowing your students, following the student data. So we say that we've got a recommendation of teaching a unit which includes a number of sounds for 2 weeks. However, you're following your students' learning, so you don't go, oh, we do that for 2 weeks, tick, move on. It's can your children recognise that code, and are they able to use that within your lessons, and how many error corrections are you doing? So I think it's an important part of the Sounds Right program is understanding that it's mastery learning, that we're not box ticking and going, yep, we've done that unit, tick, move on. We've done that unit, tick, move on. Oh, this isn't working. Why can't the students write this? Wasn't it being transferred into their actual writing? So I think that that's an important feature of Sounds Right, as the formative assessment, ensuring that children have got recognition, and then through retrieval and practice and opportunities further down the path, using that daily review, that children are now mastering it. So it's now transferring into actual the practice of writing and reading. So that's a feature that I really think is important to emphasize for sounds writers, and not box ticking. You're not just ticking it off, yes, I've done it. You're actually following the data.
And I think within that as well, we do have what we call teaching through errors. So we see when a student makes an error as a learning opportunity as well. And there's so much research backing this up that jumping onto a student at the time they make the error. And again, we've got it's a highly effective sort of what to do when a student does make that error, and that really, really does help with that formative assessment as well. So, the more errors your students are making, you're sort of thinking, I might have to go back to that. Everyone seems to be making this error. And so, but we do have a real formal approach to how to deal with those. And then we also have our diagnostics as well, which really helps if you have a new student coming into your classroom or to your clinical practice, you can diagnose and you know exactly what skills they have and what they don't have, which determines where you would start them on the program. So that's some of the features as well, which make it really a fantastic approach to teaching literacy.
Well, it really is a toolkit, isn't it?
Following on from what you said there, Helen, I'm wondering, and I'm sure other beginning teachers would wonder, what the Sounds Right diagnostics, what does that look like? Like, what are you testing there?
Sorry.
No, over to you, John.
Well, we have a test of segmenting, blending. We also test their phoneme manipulation skills. Of course, we test them. They're very simple tests, very brief tests, if you like. I mean, probably no more than 14 or 15 items in segmenting, in blending, rather more in segmenting. So we ask students, if I'm going to say the word mat, if I say the word mat and I ask you to tell me the constituent sounds in mat or what are the sounds in mat, you'd say at. So, okay, get the idea? Yeah, off we go. And we give them some words. And they start with CVC words. And of course, they get more complex as we go on. CVCC, CVC, and we see how well children are able to segment these sounds in words. Blending, similarly, we ask them to put sounds together to make recognizable words. Now, we're not talking about, put these sounds together and make the word psychiatrist or something.
Yeah.
These are simple words. So if I said to you, you would say
Cloud.
Cloud. Yes, of course. And children who can blend can do that. But it's very important for us to know exactly where they start to break down. And that's a huge help. And that has always made a massive difference to me in my own teaching, because I've run my own clinic for the past 22, 23 years now. And knowing exactly where to start a child. If you start a child or a student at CVC words, when in fact they're perfectly capable of reading and writing some CVC words, they're thinking, well, this teacher thinks I'm stupid, and you don't get off to a good start. If you can calculate pretty much where a student has broken down, to start them at that point, you take them forward immediately, and they gain confidence immediately as well, because they're starting to do things that they've not been able to do before. Right from the beginning.
Yeah. So how does that work in a classroom setting? So from what I'm understanding, that diagnostic is one-on-one. It's just a brief diagnostic with the teacher. So I guess I'm asking about differentiation, really. How does that work?
Yes, formative assessment, of course, would be the answer to that. And, one of the things that we're doing all the time, where we call them lessons. And as Helen said, we're probably better. The trouble with calling them lessons is that you have a lesson. So a Sounds Right lesson would probably extend over a 30-minute period, or roughly 30 minutes anyway. And within that lesson, there would be a number of Sounds Right lessons, which we can refer to now as activities, if you like. So within that lesson, every single activity presents the teacher with opportunities to find out exactly what children in the class know and what they don't know. So obviously, you're monitoring this all of the time in a formative sense. And you're offering opportunities. So let me just give you one brief example. It's better to concretize this, because if we talk in the abstract, then people think, what on earth does that mean? You know, this just sort of doesn't mean anything to me. So, for instance, at the very, very basic level, we're starting off to teach children sound symbol correspondences. At the same time, we're also teaching them to segment and blend. And we developed this out of a chap's work. His name was Daniel Borisovich Elkanin. He was a Russian psychologist, and he developed the technique of word building. And word building is absolutely brilliant, because on the one hand, it teaches code knowledge, a limited amount, I might add. It teaches segmenting, it teaches blending. So when we built the word mat from having the sound spelling correspondences on the board and going through the routine of the lesson, we'll ask the class to say the sounds and read the word at mat. Everybody, at mat, good. So and so, so and so, so and so, so and so, at mat. Half a dozen children. We'll choose the child that's not likely to have had this kind of prior knowledge already to repeat this at the end there, because they've already had this model for them. So we use children to model teaching over and over again, or to model practice over and over again. Then the teacher writes the word on the board. Everybody say the sounds, read the word, at, mat, so on, and we'll do that again. So there's huge amounts of, huge opportunities for practice. And it's actually practice that gets all of this information into long-term memory. It's practice that helps them to develop these skills to mastery level. Because if you're doing this over and over again, and I know it's repetitive, but actually if you want children to learn things, or you want anybody to learn anything, you need lots and lots of repetition. What we found in the research was that actually when you teach adults a skill with which they've never been engaged before in their lives, they don't do any better than young children when you're presenting them with a skill. Learning something new is very, very difficult. And we teach teachers as well that you need to put yourself in the shoes of young children and give them enough opportunities to practice so that they have the opportunity of getting this information into long-term memory.
I think I can probably build on that one for classroom practice as well. Is that the differentiation in a whole class teaching setting, because we know we've got incredibly diverse children in any classroom, is that you can differentiate the content and the instruction, like John was saying, is that you can be looking specifically at the word choices. So if you go further up into, like if you were talking foundation, John was talking foundation year, but if you start looking at year 1 and you've got a child who might still be working in that foundation space because of difficulties or challenges that they may have, is that you can look at, when you're doing word building, you might have the extended code where they're looking at more complex vowel spellings. However, that child, when they come up to do, so you can do it like John said, is that you can use other children to model it. So you're taking your children who are more confident. So when you get to that child, they're able to say, oh yes, you know, gate. But then you may choose to take a word. We were talking about adjacent consonants, which is where you might have spend. So the child is capable of that. So they get up and they build that word. So they're engaging with the class. It's a word that they're confident to read and to write. And they're participating with their peers. So that is one way that you can do it. And then, as John was saying, is that the scaffolding that you can put in place through the lessons. So the lessons have actually been designed with a number of scaffolds that can be added or taken away depending on the proficiency of the child. So if you've got a child that requires, so if you've got the word spend, you can use your gestures. It's spend, so you can use your gestures. You can be using your voice to emphasize it. We're going to change spot to spit, spot to spit, so you can use your voice emphasis. So there's a range of different inbuilt strategies within the lessons that help with that differentiation. So it's either content or the actual pedagogy of the lesson. So there's lots and lots and lots of ways, and there's some fantastic resources when you've been trained in Sounds Right and you start listening to the podcast and things like that. There's great that takes it even further. So once you've got the basics and you understand the lessons, you can kind of delve deeper into those layers of differentiation that are already inbuilt there.
And I think, can I just add as well on to what Jacinda said as well, just when she was showing a hand, the resources that we use are whiteboards and whiteboard markers, whiteboard rubber. I've brought one as well, and you can use post-its or little laminates. And since COVID, I've gone back to Sounds Right basics, and I've been using recycled paper squares because you can throw them in the bin. And every school has an abundance of recycled paper that's been printed on one side, and that's it. We don't have any bells and whistles, and you can go outside with kids and you use a stick in the sandpit if you need to, or if they're you can peg butcher's paper onto fences and get some paint out or some water out. There's very, very simple resources that you can actually, as soon as you've left the training, you can actually just go out and use your course manual and use very simple resources that every school has. And so I think that's a huge difference from some of the other programs that I've seen where you've got to have all of these bits. I think a pack of I never travel anywhere without a pack of post-its.
Can I say, by the way, can I say that we offer? Can I say that we offer a free course on? It's called the Udemy platform, UDEMY, called "Help Your Child to Read and Write." So we've got a part 1 and a part 2. Part 1 takes you through CVC level, and part 2 takes you through working with adjacent consonants or consonant clusters and into teaching some of the consonant digraphs like SH, CH, TH, and so on. And that's entirely free. And it's available online. And we've had well over 45,000 people now enroll from all over the world.
Oh, that's great. We'll definitely be sharing that one on the Science of Reading of Australia. I noticed also when I was having a dig around that you've got some free decodables to download as well.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. On the website, we've got free e-books, which can be downloaded. They cover areas of the initial code, as we call it, but some people call it the basic code. We won't quibble. Initial, basic, and the extended code as well. We've also got some free books available. Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm thinking in particular of the National Reading Panel 2000, but in recent years, a massive body of work has presented us as educators with the big 5 or the big 6. And I'm thinking in particular of oral language, phonological awareness, phonics, vocab, fluency, and comprehension. Can you tell us about which of those are addressed in your Sounds Right program and how they're addressed?
Jacinda, would you like to?
Yeah, we so from the phonological awareness, obviously we've got the lessons that are specifically working on the manipulation through the blending, segmenting, and the manipulating of sounds, where you're adding sounds, deleting sounds, and swapping in and out different sounds to read and write different words. So we've got that phonemic and phonological awareness strand well and truly sorted there, which is also the connections to the phonic, which we were talking about, word building and word reading and writing at both their initial and extended code. So that phonic knowledge, so building children's understanding of how the code works so that they're able to use it within the context of reading or writing. Then we go obviously, I know that we were talking about this earlier with Helen about oral language being the base that everything sits on, and that you can't have any teaching without that true conversation, the backwards and forwards, that reciprocal language with a child or with your classroom. So while that's part of the teaching process and part of that dynamic within a classroom, so there's a lot of oral language there. And I'm just looking at the different things that we've got. Vocabulary, I would say that as you go through, so like as you go through working with children and the conversations around building children's understanding about words and starting with what they've already got. So starting with vocabulary that's natural to the children, but then once they start to get some of that, you know, the phonics and the understanding underneath their belt, then you can kind of start stretching them into the vocabulary and looking at homophones. And then we were talking earlier about morphology, and how when children across the curriculum start to understand the morphemes, so we've got Sounds Right, which has got their flagship, which is the K to 2 plus-ish, but then they've got 3 to 6, which is really digging into the morphology and etymology and giving teachers some real good solid tools on how to look at the curriculum and those different tiers of vocabulary when you're looking at science and maths, and how to work with the children. And I know John earlier he mentioned, oh, no, it was a different conversation. He was mentioning about the morpheme families. Did you want to build on that, John?
Well, one thing we did do in the years 3 to 6 course, we were very mindful of the fact that, you know, a very, relatively speaking, few word families, 3,000 in fact, we have looked at those, the most common, 3,000 most common morpheme families in the English language enable you to read something like 89.9% of all texts, which is absolutely fascinating, actually. And we have sorted these words into exactly where they appear within the Sounds Right curriculum. So anybody wanting, once they've done, you know, as you call it, the flagship course, the initial course, they can go on to do this, and they can really start to work on, you know, children's knowledge of the language, the way the language is structured, at morpheme level, and of course, do something as well that most children find incredibly interesting, and that's talk about etymology. Which I'd love to do. Well, I mean, I used to teach sociolinguistics for the Open University, and so teaching morphemic analysis and etymology has been one of my great passions. What a sad person I sound.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think we're all here because we share a love of language.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the other parts that when you look at fluency, people go, oh, you know, we're looking at phonics. But I think that the way that that's developed is that being able to lift words off a page automatically and fluently, because we take for granted how quickly we can decode, and the way that Sounds Right really supports that is that when you're learning the ability to recognize the code and lift it off the page with ease to read words and to write words, it means that that fluency is naturally developed. And you mentioned before the decodable text that you have for free, and there's like it's hundreds of fantastic books and more coming out all the time. And the anthology, if I'm going to plug that, that's behind me.
Yeah.
What's that behind you? Sorry.
Oh, so we've just so there's been a project where this is a limited edition, isn't it, John? So you can.
You're lucky to have one. I haven't got one.
Yeah,
I haven't got one yet either.
So this is the initial code. So the basic. So it's a poetry anthology, and it goes through the initial code. And it's just beautiful. The stories are. The poems are just beautiful. And have real depth to them. So I think that giving children material that they can feel successful straight away. So like the decodable texts that start right back in that initial first sounds that they're able to blend and segment and put a book in front of them when they've got that. The joy and the sense of achievement that children have through being able to read texts that are within the code that they're being taught and that they're starting to understand. makes children feel like successful readers. So therefore, success breeds success, and that fluency and that comprehension, because fluency obviously feeds into that comprehension, being able to have that cognitive space to be able to think. So I think that in some way, and in many ways, Sounds Right has touched every single part of those different points that you mentioned from the reading panel. Sorry.
Yeah.
Jacinda, you've really answered that so beautifully. Thank you.
You did. I think as well, going back to some of Sounds Right's free resources on the Sounds Right website as well, we do actually have some speed reads. So if there's students that do need a little bit extra, and students love a game of speed reading, and again, that really does build up fluency, and is a great resource too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I saw it being played actually in a primary school recently, actually at what we call Key Stage 2 level. That's years 3 to 6, and they were using polysyllabic words, and the kids got so excited. It was great to see
they never tire.
They're so creative, they're so ingenious in the way that they present these things. It was a joy to watch. It was great fun.
That's fantastic.
All right, if you don't mind, John, I might ask a few specifics about the phonics in Sounds Right.
Yes.
So I've just made a few notes here. I've been doing a lot of reading about the science of reading and the different approaches and the best approaches, and everyone has different ideas about what's the best, and lots of people have lots of strong opinions. So I've just jotted down here, is Sounds Right speech to print or print to speech? And also, is it top down, bottom up, analytic, synthetic, linguistic? These are all the different types of phonics that we're reading about. So I was wondering, just to put you on the spot, could you bring a little bit of clarity to some of those terms? And then let us know as well which ones, or how Sounds Right stands, and possibly why as well.
Yeah, excuse me. Well, certainly, I mean, we describe ourselves as being a speech to print, sound to print, linguistic phonics program. And what that means, we teach systematically, of course, and we teach, as I said before, from simple to complex. We teach all of the common 175 or so spellings of the 44 or so sounds, depending on accent, of course, there are in the English language. As I think I mentioned right at the beginning, when I quoted Seidenberg, that actually speech is the start of reading. And it's what we build on. We show that children, that the sounds that are coming out of their mouths all the time are words that are also comprised of sounds, and those sounds can be spelt. And we do this with CVC words, and we work all the way through to the most complex polysyllabic words. So whether the word is chlorophyll, or whether the word is mat that we were talking about earlier on, we teach children to segment, blend, to work so quickly with these words that they simply lift them off the page. But the difference really between sound to print and print to sound is that what I've always found is that it makes absolutely perfect sense, because it offers a conceptual framework for the way the whole of the writing system works. Helen mentioned it before. We teach children that we read from left to right. It's one sound at a time, if you like. We teach them that you can spell sounds with 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters. These are complexities which aren't immediately obvious to children. And we teach them in the initial stages, of course. So, and we teach in a very simple way. We don't talk about digraphs. We talk about it's 2 letters, but it's 1 sound. It's 3 letters, but it's 1 sound. Okay. Why do we do that? We know that children can understand the vocabulary of trigraphs and digraphs and so on, but the people who can't are parents. And actually, when children go home, we want them to be talking about something which enables the parent to understand. Mummy, it's a 2-letter spelling, oh, really? Is it? Yeah. If they say it's a digraph, often parents' eyes roll and they think teachers are keeping the gate against them, are keeping this information from them. So we try to make the kind of language that we use as accessible as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I've just got another question as well. There's a lot of discussion about sight words.
Yes.
Do we teach sight words at all? What are they sight words? What is a sight word, or is it or are we calling them high frequency words? How does Sounds Right approach the sight words question?
Well, can I define what we mean by a sight word? Well, by a sight word, what we mean is word identification, word recognition. We teach the skills, we teach the knowledge that enable children, which enable any reader to be able to read a word just as if they're lifting it off the page. Now, obviously, that requires a lot of practice, but what we're aiming to get them to is automaticity. In any skills behavior, you need to practice and practice and practice until you reach automaticity. That's what we do in Sounds Right. And we don't think there are any sight words that you need to learn as whole words. I think that's one of the problems, really, that I think that people misunderstand, or they're unsure about the actual meaning of sight word. Sight word to us means automatic recognition through having learned to process the information that they have before them automatically. We don't think that it's a good idea to teach children sight words, because what you're doing is you're setting up two alternative systems. If you're teaching them phonics and then you're saying at the same time you've got to learn these as whole words. And in any case, we find that children who have difficulty reading have huge difficulty remembering all of these so-called sight words. So basically, we don't teach sight words. What we teach is that all words contain sounds. All sounds have been assigned spellings at some point in time, and we need to teach them those sound spelling correspondences as we go along. Now, of course, if there are common lists of 100 sight words, for instance, that were produced in the first iteration of letters and sounds that was produced in Britain in the noughties. And they really were the noughties. Anyway, the first 100 sight words, so-called sight words, or words that children had to learn by sight, if you look at them, at least 34 of those are very easily decodable and encodable words. Words like mum, dad, went, words like that. Very, very simple words. All of the rest of them fall within the scope and sequence of any phonics program that's worth its salt. And basically the same is true of the further 200 words, which were also produced subsequently. And of course, what we have done in Sounds Right, as nerdy as we are, is we've shown people exactly where all of these words fall within the Sounds Right scope and sequence. But let's take an example of a word like said, because some teachers often say, well, what do we do with said? We're in the initial code. They haven't learned that AI represents the sound yet. What do we do with that? Well, they know this. They know the d. We simply, if they're reading to us, we simply take our pencil or a chopstick if you don't want to mark the page on the book, and you say this, pointing to the two letters AI, is e. Say e here, and the child says said. And if you want to teach this more formally, you can write on a whiteboard a D, an AI, an S, and you can word build it. What's the first sound you hear? It's said. It's good. Which of these is? What's the next sound you hear? Said. Which of these do you think is Well, they know the D, so it's pretty obvious. And of course, we'll reinforce the idea. It's two letters, but it's one sound. It's not a very common spelling of but occasionally we come across it, and the word is very common, so you need to learn it. And we give them enough practice for them to learn it. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, I could just picture you in the classroom doing that then. It was very well done.
I know the videos are addictive, Ellie. The videos are addictive. You've got that beautiful voice.
I do want to say actually that we're just about to embark on a visit to Toronto, to schools in Toronto. 3 schools there that we're going to visit. No, 4 schools we're going to visit. Then we're going to Iowa, visiting a school there, and then we're going to Long Island in the United States, in the state of New York, where we're visiting a school district that have been doing Sounds Right, and we're going to be having a look and giving support to teachers throughout the visit. Answering questions, as I say, giving them further support. And I want to say, I should be teaching in those classrooms. And I love teaching. I've never stopped teaching. I've been teaching for 50 years, and I enjoy it every bit as much as when I first started. A bit like Pi Corbett, who's done the writing program as well.
Yeah.
With which we're linked, actually. We do recommend Pi Corbett's Talk for Writing program, which is gaining in popularity in Australia, I believe.
What was the name of the program?
Talk for Writing.
Talk for Writing. It's approved by DSF. In fact, DSF spelled in Western Australia, in Perth. They have a number of trainers who roll out the training.
And there's also Talk for Writing training school as well, John, in Yanchep in Perth.
That new school,
so that you can actually go and see it in action, which is really nice. But it does meld very well with Sounds Right, because again, it starts with what we all know, oral language.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. There's been, well, I know that Ellie and I were talking about this afternoon, our own journeys with our learning about the science of reading have been gigantic, significant in the last couple of years. And, the question that we hear a lot about Sounds Right is it aligned with the science of reading? Can you tell us a little bit about the research that's informed your program, and also what research you've conducted that tells us more about its efficacy?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, what the research does show is that segmenting, phoneme manipulation correlate very, very, very highly to proficiency in learning to read, and both of those activities form a significant part of the Sounds Right program. Of course, blending is important. People always say, oh, what about blending? It's the most important. Of course, blending is important. Of course, you need to be able to push sounds together to make recognizable words. That's goes without saying. What we found is that, McGuinness in particular, her early reading instruction draws very heavily. The thing about that most people don't know about McGuinness is that McGuinness was a brain scientist for many years until she really started to, start work on reading and spelling. And so a lot of her research and a lot of the research that she drew on was particularly interested in looking at the effects that all of these things had on how well children learn to read. And so there's a huge amount of information in her books. Of course, there's the reading panel report and all sorts of things. Jim Rose's report in Britain, and all sorts of things like that. In fact, even the Department for Education these days is weighed in with all sorts of very good advice, which draws heavily on the research, and which, of course, we are perfectly aligned. In fact, we've been validated by the Department of Education twice over the last, how many years? 12, 13 years now.
Sorry, which department are you talking about?
The Department of Education in the UK.
In the UK. Yeah.
In the UK.
But also
to look at two of our trainings, and we got we got glowing references from them, so that was pretty good. The other thing I did want to tell you about, though, was that we have been doing a lot of qualitative research recently, working in schools, asking schools to write their own reports on how sounds right, how they took on right, how they developed it, how influential it's been, how successful it's been. But I think one of the most important things that we ever did was that between 2003 and 2009, we drew on the evidence from, I think it was around 25 schools. Anyway, there were 1,607 children involved in this study, going from what we call reception, what you call prep, kindy, reception in South Australia, through to year 2, 1,607 children, and we gave them a properly normed and standardized spelling test, and we have the results of that spelling test on our website. Over 90% of children were performing, excuse me, at or above their expected age for spelling.
That's impressive, isn't it?
And very often that was hugely above their chronological age. You know, we had children who were 7 years old spelling at a level of 11 and 12 and so on.
Wow.
So I don't think anybody's ever done that before. And
when was that study done?
That was done between 2003 and 2009. And in fact, I presented it to my peers at the Open University when we had a big get together at one time. We were invited to present our research. And the people who got most excited about it were, of all people, the mathematicians, the engineers, the physicists. They went, this is incredible. The test needs to be renormed if you roll out. But you know, getting people to take an interest in this kind of detail is very difficult. Since then, we've replicated these results many times in many of our Sounds Right schools.
That's significant data, isn't it?
It is. And John, can you just let Ali and Camilla know about the phonics screening test? I mean, those results have been consistent in the UK, and some of the schools that have rolled out this phonics screening test in Australia. I think
in New South Wales and Victoria.
I mean, many of those UK schools have consistently got, is it students over 95% with the phonics screening test, which is absolutely amazing results. And can I just add as well, the West Australian government has endorsed Sounds Right as a preferred phonics programme as well. So that was a huge win over here. We were delighted with it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
If I can mention the phonics screen sheet, when it first came out in the UK, and of course we absolutely thoroughly support it, despite the fact that, you know, so many academics, so many people in the field of, you know, training teachers and so on were incredibly hostile to it. You know, oh, you can't do this.
And still.
And still, even in the UK, there's still opposition to it. But and it's amazing, really, because one of the things that I think it's been most effective in doing is making teachers aware of children who really should be able to perform many of these skills, reading simple words by the time they get to the end of year 1. And if they can't do that, then something needs to be done about it, because every child is entitled to learn to read. One of the things I think that was most significant for us was that in St. George's Church of England School, in a place called Battersea, just south of the river in London, one of the most challenging areas actually in London, apparently the catchment area has got within it, you know, some of the poorest areas in London, they got 100% on the phonics screening check year after year after year. And they showed that every single child could learn to read and as well learn to write. And it's down to the determination of head teachers, driving it, sure that every child, being passionate about it, it is the most important thing, and every child deserves that right. I think that's something
They
that
do. They do.
we feel
And again, that's why we're all here, isn't it? We did touch on it a little bit then. I would like to know, and I'm sure that our listeners and our members would like to know about curriculum alignment. Have you done the mapping with the program to the Australian curriculum? Does it exist? Is there a document somewhere?
I did quite a bit of research into this, and you know, when I started, and obviously being a teacher, and you're looking at the curriculum when you're doing your reporting and how you've achieved the achievement standards, and then in this preparation, I was going, okay, well, I know my area and my part, because like ACARA, so for the ACT, we use ACARA as the mother document. That is the document. There are no other bridging documents other than within your school context or within your diocese or directorate, whichever school system you're with. So in searching outside, it's looking at, we've got version 9.0 coming. So it was released, it's unveiled in 2022, sorry. And then the documentation across every state and territory's websites when you're looking at curriculum is showing that they're using 2023 as one of those transition years, that they're upskilling teachers, looking at the resources that they need for their schools. And then in 2024, there's a commitment by all states that I can see and territories that they will fully transition to the new English curriculum. So there might be a staggered approach to the rest of the curriculum that has had some changes, but when we're talking English, there's a commitment in 2024. So the particular substrand that's obviously Sounds Right's heading is the substrand of phonics and word knowledge. And the differences between the version 8.4 and the 9 is that they've taken out looking at predictive text as the training wheels for learning emergent readers, and they've put in the wording of decodable text. So we're all thrilled that they have removed the reference of learning those high frequency or sight words, as we were talking about before, instead of doing them as visual memory. They've put them in as, it's a little bit more vague, where they're saying there is the learning of high frequency words, but they're not saying that's to be done through using your visual memory. So examples of using sight word, your flashcards and just going the over and over, and expecting that to sink in effectively and be able to retrieve it to be able to write it. So they've removed that, which was great. I think that where Sounds Right's involved, that particular digging into, so when I was looking at a foundation year, so if I use ACARA's 9.0 as the base that everybody across Australia in 2024, 2025,
That's your dog, Camilla?
No. It's truly my dog. I apologize.
Right. So foundation year, they've got that heavy focus on that initial code is what we call it. And they're looking at that by the end, I'll read the thing. It says by the end of, now I've lost my point. Anyway, doesn't matter. By the end of foundation year, that students will have those initial sound spelling correspondences and be able to read them in CBC words.
I apologise. I told my husband to
maybe mute, Camilla.
Actually, welcome to Sounds Right.
I thought I'd been so clever getting everyone to use the back door, but it actually really upset her.
Oh my gosh.
It's like teaching during lockdown. Maybe I can mute you.
Oh dear. Okay, so from the CBC level, initial spellings, single syllable words, Sounds Right scope and sequence actually covers that by the middle of, so if you're talking foundation year, the middle of term 2. So the achievement standard is covered for the end of the year. by the middle of term 2, if the Sounds Right program, so we taught with fidelity, that 25 to 30 minutes a day, students are able to read, write, and start doing some dictations and reading decodable text with the single sound spelling correspondences. So you've got that nailed. Then what happens is that now you're looking at year 1 and year 1's curriculum, and the way that Sounds Right attaches to that is that we were talking about adjacent consonants. The language that's used in the curriculum is the consonant clusters or blends, and we were talking about how for Sounds Right, the word blends is a noun, and there's about 74 or 77 different blends, and it's so you've got full and grr and skr and spool. Those are consonant clusters. That if you've got your initial code sound spelling correspondences, and then in Sounds Right we teach children how to manage reading words like that, like went and spent, where you've got the nt or the sp at the front. If they can blend together, then we don't need to teach them that sp is a sound or a unit of anything, because they've got this and they've got the p. So therefore, you're not adding anything to their working memory. You're not. I think some people, when you're teaching things like that, they make them seem like they're a unit. Like the CH is like ch, and the SH is like sh. So they treat them like that. But if you've got children, without confusing them, just say we're teaching how to blend words like the went, nt, instead of the nt. Yeah, so we're teaching using adjacent consonants. So we've got our units 8 to 10, which teach children very specifically how to manage that, and that's in the year 1 curriculum content. And so if we're doing that over term 2 and term 3, the children, there's no extra code added, so you've not got nothing else added to the table of working memory. You are just managing that cognitive load of being able to hear, to blend and segment words with increasing numbers of sounds in it, and then we at the end in term 4 we move to those early digraphs and the SH, the CH, the TH, those sounds. We then really consolidate everything they've got. They've learnt it to mastery, and that's also in the year 1 curriculum. So they're in year 1 curriculum, they've got the early digraphs. So in your foundation year, you have well and truly covered what they require for foundation. You've started that year 1 content, and then when they get to year 1, if you've got your mastery learning at that initial code, being able to blend and segment those words with 4 or 5 sounds, and you've got the digraphs, it means that when they get to the extended code, the more complex vowel spellings and consonant spellings, that they've got that under their belt. Their brain is able to manage the complexities of that extended code, that A has a number of spellings. And when you look at ACARA, this, the year 1 standard, it says that they're able to start the more common complex spellings, and that would be the way that Sounds Right's structured, is that in year 1, they're introduced to the most common spellings of those extended code sounds. And then in year 2, which in year 2, when you look at the content, it says more spelling. So it's building on the layer that you've given them in year 1. And that's how Sounds Right's developed, is that within that first year, they're exposed to the most common spellings of the extended code units. And then when you get to year 2, they layer on. So you go back and you can build on. So they are re-exposed to the ones that they've learned, making sure that those are solid. And they put another layer of spellings. Like if you're talking about A, you start off with AI, AY, A, and the split vowel. So then when you get to year 2, you start layering on the EIGH, the EY, even though those end up earlier in year 1. Using
so if I've got this right, Jacinda, if I follow Sounds Right, I am ticking the boxes for my curriculum.
Oh yes, you absolutely are.
Yeah.
So, and then aligned with it, because like in year 1 and 2, they start talking about words with more than one syllable. So being able to manage 1 and 2 syllables. So yes, absolutely. Early on in the extended code, polysyllabic words are introduced very gently, and then that complexity builds up. So yes, you're ticking off from the foundation year right up to year 6 using Sounds Right when I look at it, because of that phonic knowledge, but then also you're going into that morphology when you go further into the code, and using lessons like the polysyllabic lessons are the most incredible lessons when it comes to curriculum teaching. That vocabulary, when you're looking at vocabulary in the curriculum, the science curriculum and the maths curriculum in particular, the lessons that are in the Sounds Right program, you're able to start to diversify and kind of go, okay, well, we're talking about the water system, you know, the water cycle. We've got precipitation and evaporation and things like that. Being able to work, teachers have a clear scaffold of how to manage words that have more than one syllable and complex spellings, you know, uncommon spellings. I think that is really useful. So yes, it's covering many parts of the curriculum. I'm just like the phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, the blending, segmenting and manipulating of sounds through the sound swapping kind of things. That's specifically targeted in the curriculum. So there's lots and lots of things. Yes, you are ticking off a lot of your achievement standards.
Great, thank you.
It was long-winded.
Very passionate.
Very.
I'm just keeping an eye on the time here, and we are up to our hour already.
Oh wow.
Camilla, did you have a question to finish off
just
for us?
One more, and it's a question that's come to me before, and so I'm just going to ask it of you. That you know, we've got schools and educators that really investigating change and how to take the body of evidence that is the science of reading and use that to inform better practice or best practice. So if a school is at ground zero and they have come across, discovered, heard about Sounds Right, and they are wondering how to make Sounds Right a part of their school practice, what are the pragmatics around that? What's the time investment going to be? What is the training? What are the costs associated? What's the school going to need to do to embed Sounds Right into their practice?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is a big question. And can you please condense your answer to 2 minutes?
Right. So,
I think it depends how big the school is.
Yes.
So yes, I mean, obviously they'd have to commit to the training. One thing that we've changed about Sounds Right, or in the process of changing right now, and a lot of work is going into this, obviously it doesn't emerge immediately, is that we're putting a lot of time into giving support to people once they've trained, so that when people are starting to get it going, they want advice and so on. Well, first of all, we have two Facebook groups, one for the UK and US and one for Australia and for New Zealand as well, where people can ask questions and get advice about anything that they want to ask. Basically, I'm teaching in a school, I'm doing this, that, and the other, what do I do now? That kind of thing. We do have follow-ons, as you know. We've got the year 3 to 6 course as well. Basically, there is a 4-day training which is offered face-to-face. That can run 1 day a week. It can run 2 days and then 2 days. Sometimes it's run, 4 days a run on the bounce. It depends on what the trainer, it depends on where people want the training and where the trainings are being run and how easy it is for the trainer to get to the training. Obviously, Australia is a huge country, something I've become very well aware of since I've been
We're very proud of that.
so many times. And of course, there's the online training, and the online training offers, as much, if not more, than the face-to-face training. That takes place over something like 6 weeks. There's an introductory week, There are the 4 main teaching weeks, and there's a sort of roundup at the end. Trainers charge. They're not allowed to price fix. I don't know whether you know that. We recommend a certain price. So I can't remember what it is actually. I never concern myself with prices and none of that mucky stuff. I'm more interested in linguistics.
Big picture.
But it is obviously a practical question. So Jacinda, how much is it for a face-to-face course? Roughly speaking, what does
currently it's 880. And Helen, is that correct?
It's 880 including GST as well. So schools are able to claim back the GST on that too. But we do have packages as well if there are school groups going through. And I think that Sounds Right is putting a lot of work in. So things will be changing a little bit in the future to have packages. So there's room for further development and things like that. The main thing is we've taught schools, there's a wide berth in Australia because you can have a school that's in the middle of the wheat belt in West Australia with a teaching principal, a teacher and an education assistant, to a metropolitan school with 900 staff. So when you say the costs are going to vary enormously, but we've taught them all. We've taught the School of the Year. We've done really well. So the main thing is to contact Sounds Right with your what you've got, how you want to start, and if you are in a large school, maybe train your pre-primary in your year 1, possibly year 2 staff up and stagger it that way. And then of course, because Sounds Right can be used for intervention, either small group, which is tier 2, or tier 3 1-to-1, quite often schools are training up their intervention staff as well. And then slowly, as those students then run through the school, you start training those staff coming through, and that helps to manage it. Although we've trained, especially with the online training, we've trained whole schools up within a year where the staff have been staggered and we've just done the whole lot. They've just got the funding and they've just gone for it. And so we have done that as well. So the online training is very flexible, and it's great for schools to actually train a large cohort at once, because they can actually give PD days separately through the week. So you'd have 5 staff on a Monday doing PD, 5 staff on a Tuesday and going through. So it can be very flexible, and the collegiate support that they offer each other is really heartwarming to see. They live and breathe Sounds Like. This is mainly for the online training for whole 6 weeks. But then again, as trainers, we do go into school. I'm heading off to the wheat belt on Sunday for a week, which is going to be very nice, and a lovely little district school there. And we do that. We all travel. Jacinda is going to be John travels all. John's got the best cat because he goes to the US and Africa and New Zealand. He goes all over.
That does sound like fun.
And it does. So so we can. I mean, the great thing about Sounds Right is the flexibility of the program, but it's also as trainers, we can offer that flexibility of how what have you got? How do you want to be trained? We can definitely make it work.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And our listeners will love to know that there is such great flexibility. And as I said to you earlier, I completed the online training last year and loved it. Really loved it. I can't imagine that that wasn't as powerful as an experience as face to face. I really thoroughly enjoyed the flexibility as well.
That's great to hear. We do actually have a Sounds Right Revisited course where you can actually do that original practitioner training in 3 weeks, but you don't have the assessments. And if you've really enjoyed the online practitioner training, we've had so many participants go through the 3 weeks again, and they've loved it. It's mainly to watch videos of John.
Yeah. Love that. So if I can go back to you talking about Facebook pages a moment ago, I really want to say to you how incredibly accessible you are to the Sounds Right community on the Australian page. It's I love when you come on and someone asks something and then there's a John at the end of it, and you always come on. I can hear your voice in your responses, and I really admire the availability you have to your Sounds Right community.
Thanks. I mean, I try to answer people's questions as honestly and as thoroughly as I can. Not 2 lines, but you know, a detailed answer if that's what they need. I do try to do that.
Thank you.
I enjoy it. It's I live it and breathe it. It's great.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably time for me to wrap it up. It's been such a pleasure talking to you all. I want to say congratulations on such a well-regarded program as well. You're doing a great job, and thank you, John. Thank you very much for coming to join us this evening, or I believe this morning from the UK.
That's right. Yeah. I'm going to have my 11s in a minute.
And Jacinda and Helen, thank you so much for all of your knowledge and experience and for sharing that with us about the Sounds Right program this evening.
Pleasure.
Oh,
absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're always here for answering questions. We're part of the tribe and always open to people emailing or obviously through the Facebook.
Through the Facebook page. Okay. And I will make an effort to link in all of the quotes and the books and the people that we spoke about today as well when we publish.
Thank you.
That's great.
All right.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.